All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. You're joining us for a discussion with Senator Patrick Leahy and his staff on supporting the economic future of Vermont. I want to welcome you all for joining today. I'm Charles Martin, the Government Affairs Director at the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. Our guest today is Senator Patrick Leahy. He's currently President pro tempore of the United States Senate, Chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and the senior-most member of the Senate Judiciary Committee and Senate Agricultural Committee. As Vermonters, many of us have had the opportunity to vote for Senator Leahy and engage with him on issues. While he has always been a leader that Vermont can count on, he also ranks first in seniority in the Senate, which is extremely beneficial to Vermont. Today gives Vermont Chamber members and other businesses around the state an opportunity to engage directly with Senator Leahy. And of course, duty calls. The Senator is currently opening the Senate session as we speak, but we expect him to be with us shortly. Until then, we have two of his staff with us. Many of you probably know Chris Saunders. He joined the Senator's staff in 2002 and works out of the Senator's state office on economic development, telecom, and transportation issues. Chris, if you want to give the camera a wave, I'll distinguish between you and Jeff. Jeff Van Oot is also with us. He's the Senator's Washington lead on economic development, taxes, broadband, transportation, and other issues. He previously worked on healthcare and education policy in the Senator's DC office and is originally from Brattleboro, Vermont. All right, well, in the meantime, the Senator should be joining us around 3:15. We're gonna start things off with a discussion with Chris and Jeff and kind of focus on the infrastructure plan that the Biden administration has proposed and many in the Senate are endorsing, including Senator Leahy. Chris or Jeff, could you two help us frame the discussion in Congress around the infrastructure plan, kind of where it is at this point and where you expect it to be over the next few months? Either or. Chris, you can go, or Jeff.
Sure. I'll start in and then Jeff will fix all the details that I've screwed up. So hi, everybody. As Charles mentioned, I'm Chris, work here on the state side of the Senator staff. We have been collecting from Vermonters over the past year, billions of dollars of ideas and priorities for the state, and helping the Senator think through those and look at the opportunity that's in front of us with the President's American Jobs Plan, and try to find a way to incorporate those ideas into the bill. The process really started with the president announcing his proposals, and Congress has picked up the ball and started to hold hearings on those ideas. I know Senator Leahy will want to talk about his work and his role in that. Last week, his committee, the Senate Appropriations Committee, had 4 of the cabinet secretaries in person to talk about those ideas. But the hope and the belief is that Congress will take the ball and run with it, trying to pass a bill first through the House of Representatives later this summer, maybe by the 4th of July, and then the Senate picking it up and making some adjustments and sending it back over to the House either later in the summer or early in the fall. I think the dynamic that folks are keenly aware of, the Senate really having the slimmest of majorities for Democrats, means that there's a pretty narrow framework for which they can pass a bill. And to the degree that anybody kind of follows the machinations of the Senate and the Senate rules, there are some procedures that allow the Senate to move forward and get a bill just with Democratic votes. That will be kind of a key piece over the next couple of weeks and months. The president has made very clear his intention to reach out to folks on the other side of the aisle and bring them into the process. But at the same time, acknowledge that he's got a vision and feels that he wants to move forward with a bill that meets his goals and objectives. And if he has to go with a bill that the majority of the country support, but ultimately doesn't have bipartisan votes in the Senate, he will use that tool if necessary. So I think there'll be a lot of action. The bill is still coming together and ideas are still being considered. I know the Senator will talk about some of his priorities that include broadband and road and transportation infrastructure, water, wastewater, those types of things, as well as the more human infrastructure that you've seen the Biden administration talking about. So Jeff, what did I miss, or what didn't I include?
I think you touched on all the high level topics. Did a very good job with that. And I mean, just to go further on what you've already said is that there are more proposals to come. I mean, as we all know, President Biden has his first joint address in front of Congress to mark his first 100 days of the administration on Wednesday, and the expectation is for the president to unveil his white paper for the more human infrastructure side of things for that prior to the joint address with the American Families Plan. And we'd be happy also to speak more about that. And as we are continuing to, on the congressional side of things, we are continuing to work with the administration and field ideas and hear proposals, and legislative text is still in the works. And as far as that, I would also add that on the other side of the aisle, the Senate Republicans, as I'm sure a lot of people have seen, have begun their process of negotiations and offered a counter proposal to the Biden initial white paper for the American Jobs Plan. And we're happy to go more into that as well. Just let us know. Thank you.
Yeah, that might actually be somewhat interesting for the company here without getting too terribly political. Is there sort of a stark differences between the Republican plan and the Democratic plan at this point? I guess it might be easier to talk about where they overlap so we can kind of start framing around, what we might be able to expect. Chris or Jeff?
Apologies. I think in terms of, let's start with similarities. In terms of similarities, both have do make significant investments in various sectors of America's infrastructure. And for the GOP proposal, they primarily focus on specific funding to repair roads and bridges by proposing 299 billion there. Out of all the proposals, I believe that is the only one. Nope, and airports too. That is one of the few where the levels are above initial proposals of the American Jobs Plan. I think they also have included within the GOP's counter proposal is 61 billion for public transit, when compared to the American Jobs Plan, which would provide 85 billion. And I feel as though their dedication, the investment proposal for rail is not nearly significant enough to fix the issues that are at play right now. And I don't know if Chris would like to, hello, Senator.
Hello, Senator Leahy.
The session, and there are a few delays on the floor.
No worries at all, Senator. We're just happy you're with us.
I wanted to be with you, but every so often the job gets in the way.
It's an important job, and we are certainly understanding. Opening up the United States Senate is as good a reason as any to be a little bit tardy for one of these Zoom panels. Senator, we already kind of introduced you in the introductory remarks, and Chris and Jeff were just starting to discuss the Biden infrastructure plan, the proposals that you're supportive of, and kind of the proposals from the Republican side of things and where those overlap. I think folks on the call would be interested in kind of generally hearing about, your history of working with President Biden and Vice President Biden and Senator Biden throughout his tenure as a public servant, and kind of what you're most excited about in terms of future collaboration with the administration, and what excites you about this infrastructure plan that's been proposed.
All right, so I start here?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Let's see, I know we have other chamber members on, and I appreciate that, and I'm glad we're doing it here. I'll be at her home in Middlesex next week at this time. is, I know we're going to talk a little bit about broadband. It's not as easy to do these from there, even though we're halfway between Montpelier and Waterbury. It's not totally a joke that to get a good signal, you just put one foot on the coffee table, lean one elbow against one doorknob, point toward a particular window, and you might get it. Even though we pay for the top grade. But I mention that only because you have to think of it when you see so many people working from home, kids going to school, my own grandchildren going to school remotely. And so I worked a lot with the governor and the others in the state about this. In fact, I had a long talk with Governor Scott this morning. We were talking about COVID and what we can do with getting vaccines out. You know, they have a system where if a pharmacy gives them, but they have some left over, they have to send them back. And the governor said, you know, we got some rural areas, don't send them back anywhere. We'll get them to people, even if we have to have state employees or National Guard or something drive them house to house. We'll get them there. And he told Doug Emhoff, Kamala Harris's husband, when he was in town the other day, he said, just count the number of pharmacies between here and the airport. And this is the largest, the Burlington area, the largest concentration. You see very, very few. And so we have to do it differently in our state. And so he and I are working on that. I met with the White House this morning about it, and he's going to be on a conference call with the same people from the White House tomorrow morning, along with other governors. They hope they can do that. But we know the gaps we have because of COVID. The nationwide 12 million women have lost their jobs and lost their work from their workforce. The BIPOC community has been heavily hit. Look at our lodgings and restaurants. I mean, these are your members, and you're hearing the same stories from them that I'm hearing, or that I hear when I'm back home in Vermont. So I think we have to figure out where we go now. Our labor shortage, that's reemerging as a significant concern. I am glad to see so many companies have worked like mad to stay open. They've had to innovate, they've had to change, but they stayed open, and that's helped us, of course. I've tried to make sure that we've had the money that might help. The first COVID package had what's called the Leahy small state minimum in it. That got us about $1.5 billion for Vermont. And I thought it was well worthwhile because it was spent on the right things: the Paycheck Protection Program, direct assistance to Vermonters, those who are out of work, what you might do. But we also want to make sure their state fiscal situation didn't collapse, so they could work with businesses around the state. And I made it very clear to the other members of the Appropriations Committee, I didn't particularly give a darn whether they're Republicans or Democrats. I said, we're all in this together. If you get COVID, or you're out of a job, or worse, both, they don't ask what your political background is. They ask what's going to happen. So in the American Rescue Plan in March, I was able to get another $1 billion to Vermont. But I know the governor and the legislature worked hard on that. I want to get through the pandemic, of course, but we got to let's use this as an opportunity to build back a lot stronger. We used to say infrastructure, everybody said, oh, we got to fix that bridge or that road. It's a lot more than that. We have to put resources in transportation and affordable housing, water, infrastructure. We talked a little bit about the what we do with the internet and broadband. Well, there's so much that we have to do. I remember as a little child, my grandparents telling me they lived in South Reigate, Vermont, and they told me how when rural electrification came to their community, and my grandfather said, you just walk over, turn the light on, turn the light off. And I grew up in Montpelier. I said, well, what's the big deal? Everybody's got electric lights. Well, they didn't. In large parts of Vermont didn't. Well, now by the same token, if I walk in my office in Burlington, I log on to the computer, I've got high-speed internet. But if you're a kid who has to go to school online, Derby Line or other small parts of the state, Island Pond, you may not have that. And we can no longer say, well, someday we'll build it. It's going to be the same way when you go to your home, you can turn the light on, they're going to be able to turn on the internet. So if we don't, I don't know what we're going to do in creating jobs. You've done a lot working with some of these job creation sites, but we have to create a lot more. And we have to say that, okay, we have to jump forward a number of years after COVID. But I see Jeff Van Newton, Chris Sanders on the screen. They understand this far better than I do. I'm merely a constitutional impediment to the staff, does all the work. Don't tell them I said that, but they can, when I have to go back to the floor a little bit, they can take over. But you probably have a lot of questions you want to ask.
Absolutely, Senator. And I so appreciate your continued focus on, and all of us at the chamber do, on pandemic recovery, because as you alluded to, we have to get through that before we can kind of be more forward thinking. But in the name of kind of being forward thinking, folks are tremendously interested in kind of the ongoing discussion with the administration. And you touched on a little bit of it on the infrastructure plan that the Biden administration's proposed. I know that you've worked pretty closely with President Biden when he was Vice President Biden and Senator Biden from Delaware. What excites you kind of most about the potential of this plan and what it could do for Vermont and northern border region states?
We're going to have we're going to fund the Northern Regional Commission, of course, extensively. And I changed the law in that about a year ago. So it's not just the northern part of our state. It goes all the way down the bottom of the state. And in fact, they would go to a couple of ribbon cuttings before we had to start wearing masks down in southern Vermont because of things through the Northern Border Regional Commission. We'll continue that. But I've had a number of discussions with President Biden, and he said, look, I'm not thinking about what do we do during this term of the Congress? How do we get through this? So I'm looking at my grandchildren. You better look at yours. What do we do for them? What's going to be the difference? How do we get young people coming out of school today? How do they have jobs, decent jobs? How do we keep the businesses that fought hard to stay open during COVID? How do we make sure they know we're with them and they can stay open and can start hiring again? He's very, very committed to it. Now we have one thing we do joke a little bit about. He said to me the other day, he said, how's it feel to be third in line to the presidency, which is what I am as president pro tem. And I said, Joe, I always prayed for your health and safety before. I pray for it twice as much now as I did then. You kind of enjoyed that. But he's in it for the long run. He's done the right things. He's talked to Republicans and Democrats. And what I've done with the Appropriations Committee, I've worked very closely with Dick Shelby, conservative Republican, who's the senior Republican on the committee, but he's one of my closest personal friends. We've traveled different parts of the world together, and we are trying very, very hard to bring Republicans and Democrats in and vote on real things. But I made it very clear, I'm not looking at something to pass to take care of this year. You know yourself, if we just plan in Vermont just for this year, who knows what hits next year? What if we have a natural disaster or something? We got to plan for the future.
Yeah, I definitely, or we definitely agree with you on that here at the chamber. And, you know, I guess I would ask sort of out of, Chris Saunders mentioned you had a meeting last week with some cabinet officials on this very topic. I'm kind of curious as to what that discussion entailed, what those priorities were, and kind of who was present there, and what you were able to discuss.
Well, of course, and you mentioned Chris Saunders and Jeff Van Hoot. You should always never hesitate. Them, John Tracy, Paulie Major, any of the people in my office. You have a message you want to get to me, call them. They send me memos every single day, and it helps the more I hear from home. The cabinet members we met with were very clear. They're not looking at this as a partisan political thing. They're saying we're here, we got handed this terrible problem as do other parts of the world. Let's get out of it, but let's come back a lot stronger than we were before. I could not help but think on a much smaller scale when Hurricane Irene hit Vermont. And I remember flying over Vermont with the governor, adjutant general in a helicopter the day after the hurricane, and looking at a farmhouse that had been on one side of the river is now on the other side of the river, upside down. Look at bridges, look like toys, they'd just been twisted. And I was almost in tears, seeing things I'd known from the days I was a child. But we said, we'll come back stronger. And Vermont did. And but the whole country has to do that now. One of the things that encouraged me in talking with cabinet members, they all come from different backgrounds. They were all optimistic. They think we can do it. It's not going to be exactly the program that I might write or you might write, but it'll be one that we can all come to. Our state, because of its size, location, has problems, but then Oklahoma has different kinds of problems, sometimes exacerbated by drought. We have got to come together, and I'm hoping that the partisan temperature we heard during the last election will just fade away and do as we have in Vermont, where Republicans and Democrats have worked together.
We're certainly hopeful that's the case as well, because I think everyone's pretty excited about the potential of this infrastructure plan. Changing gears a bit, in Vermont, as you know, we have quite a workforce shortage. We have sort of a demographics challenge of the state's aging population and such. I know Governor Scott recently sent a letter to the State Department that was indicating Vermont can continue to be a great home for new Americans. And at the chamber, a lot of our members depend on new Americans to augment their workforces. So with that in mind, I'm just kind of curious as to what you envision for work on immigration reform and how that might help rural states like Vermont that really need people to live here and are welcoming of those people.
Well, you know, the Senate a few years ago passed a comprehensive immigration bill. Unfortunately, the House refused. Speaker Boehner would not bring it up, and I think he wishes he had now because it would have passed. But the Leahys came to Vermont about 1850, part of his economic refugees from Ireland. And then before 1900, my maternal grandparents immigrated from Italy to Vermont. They also come looking for a better way of life. My grandfathers were both, my grandfather Patrick Leahy, my grandfather Pietro Zambo, were stone carvers. But they helped build businesses and made it better. We are a nation of immigrants. Marcel's family immigrated from Canada. She was born in Newport, Vermont. They spoke French at home. Her uncle, Tony Palmo, just died at slightly over 100 years old, created big businesses, which his family carries on. Immigrants have been good for Vermont. I don't know what we would do otherwise. You know, they thought after the Civil War and we lost so many Vermonters, we might disappear as a state. And so we had a lot of immigrants came into Vermont, and it made a difference and improved it. We have to do that. Our farm community, we have got to update our immigration bill. We've got to be able to give dairy farmers time to stay here for more than a matter of months. You can't say, okay, come here for a few months to help, and we'll just tell the cows when you come back next year they can milk you again. It doesn't work that way. And in the high tech area, what we've seen in some of our high tech industry, the number of people are there. I tell the story of Bill Sessions, a federal judge, makes it a point to do these naturalization ceremonies where he swears in new citizens. You've probably been to some, I've been to them. I find them very emotional. George Bush was at one in New York last weekend. And so Bill had a sudden blood clot in his brain about a year or so ago. They come to the hospital just in time, had an emergency operation, and he would have died if he hadn't had it. His last immigration ceremony, he told the story of that. He said, the reason I'm telling it, I looked at the doctor who saved my life, operated my brain, and I remember when I gave him the oath of citizenship as an immigrant to Vermont. Now, you could tell hundreds of other stories like that. We have got to improve our immigration system. We've got to make it better. We've got to welcome people. We need it for all kinds of workforces, not just farming. We have it high tech, the medicine, and I think the pandemic has probably brought this home to a lot of people that in a lot of parts of this country, they would not have made it through, but the first generation or even those seeking citizenship who have worked on it.
Well, Senator, I definitely appreciate that, and we're hopeful that we can have additional new Americans move to the state because we know that our businesses here certainly depend on them to be successful. I wanted to ask you those questions in case you had to run back to the floor, but getting a little more specific on the infrastructure plan, and this might be a question for Chris Saunders. Claudia Lavelle from Lawson's Finest Liquids asks us to discuss the future of Amtrak service in Vermont, any additional service rail lines, and what Vermonters might be able to expect in that realm and how it might relate to this infrastructure proposal. So I don't know, if that's something you want to answer, Chris.
I'll let Chris go into that, but first I'm going to say, I speaking on the floor again about how we're seeing railroads coming back to Vermont, and working with Canada when that border can open up so we can go straight. I mean, I remember as a law student taking the Montrealer back home to Vermont from Georgetown. But it was a Montrealer because it went to Montreal through here, and we got to get back to that. I know we've had grandkids here during the summer. We love to take the train, and we go from either Waterbury or Montpelier, go down to White River, go see the Montshire Science Museum. And so we're working on that. But Chris, you want to add to this?
Sure. The two quick updates would be that the Agency of Transportation in conjunction with Amtrak has just kind of put the final pieces together to get the Ethan Allen service from Rutland to Burlington. So that should be able to start sometime in the coming months, either before the end of this year or next year. I think there's some considerations about making sure it's successful right off the bat, but that is pretty much ready to go. Senator Leahy's been working for a while on, as you mentioned, restoring the Montrealer, and the chief challenge there has been inspecting travelers on the train. And so what he's done is passed a couple of laws that allow Americans and any traveler to be screened by Customs and Border Protection at Central Station in Montreal before they board the train, and then the train it wouldn't stop before then it comes down to St. Albans. And so most of the roadblocks on the U.S. side have been taken care of, and we've been working with former Vermont Transportation Secretary Brian Searles and others to work with our Canadian counterparts to get that proposal, tempted to use a bad rail pun, but to get that moving forward. So those are the two most immediate. There are other conversations. Amtrak released this big proposal about how they would spend some of the Biden infrastructure money, and some of that would lead to increased service along the Vermonter route. So there are definitely opportunities, both as part of the infrastructure bill and as some of the regular course of the work the senator's taking on.
What Chris wanted to say, but he bit his tongue. He wanted to say getting it back on track. But and of course, we've probably, certainly in my lifetime, never had a president who likes railroads as much as President Biden. He used to, after his first wife was killed, he'd take the train back home to Delaware almost every day, so he could be with his sons. And he talks about the trains all the time. Every time I would mention to him I've been in New York City for something, and he said, "Well, Pat, did you take the train?" I said, "Yes." "Oh," he said, "Good." We'll get him back.
We're definitely excited about that. Switching gears a little bit to sort of soft infrastructure and going into the chat, we have a few questions in the chat on investments in high quality childcare and how that can play into, generally just being beneficial to our state and also freeing up workforce to contribute to the businesses that need workforce. It's kind of a general question either for you, Senator, or your staff, but could you discuss a little about what this infrastructure plan can mean for childcare and other investments that have been made in the childcare front even prior to this infrastructure plan?
I think everybody understands that childcare is real, and it's a real cost. And as people start going back to work, it's going to be even more so. I'm trying to keep as much flexibility in the money that goes to the state. I'm trying to make sure in the appropriations committee we don't do a one size fits all. Now that's kind of a general thing, but I have a lot of faith in our governor and our legislature take that money and make sure it's spent in a way that will do that. But there again, even on the child care, we also have to have the people available to do the child care.
Yep.
I don't know that Chris or Jeff want to add to that.
I would, yes, I'd be happy to add to that, Senator. I mean, as what was brought up at the top of this in my past work in healthcare education and including childcare, the Senator and as Chair of Appropriations does understand the significant need for increased funding for childcare centers and how the economic impacts that will have in Vermont and places across the country. We've heard from childcare providers throughout the pandemic and prior to the pandemic about this desperate need, especially in the state. And we know we are just as concerned and upset as others when we hear the stories about working young parents having to travel 30 minutes to a childcare center one way, then drive 45 minutes the other way to get to work. That's unacceptable. And we're doing all that we can to bring the money to Vermont to ensure that we can fix problems like that.
Thanks, Jeff. And the thing is that, and I sound like a broken record sometimes in the Appropriations Committee, although if you're chairman, they'll listen to the broken record. But I say that the scale in an urban area is so different than what we face in much of our state. But then I'll go around the committee, point to various Republicans, various Democrats. I'll say, you have this rural area in your state, you have that rural area in your state. And it is amazing how, again, it's bringing Republicans and Democrats together. They don't see this as a political issue.
That's definitely welcoming to hear. So switching, I apologize, I'm kind of jumping around a bit, but I'm trying to get through the attendee questions and do my due diligence on behalf of the business leaders who are here today. Claudia also asked the question about the feasibility of electric commuter buses running on the length of 89, so kind of, outside of just Washington and Chittenden County. And then we had an additional question from Kyle Clark from Beta Technologies on what is being done at the federal level to support EV charging infrastructure, especially dual use aircraft, car, truck charging systems. So I guess to kind of roll that all into one question, and this is Senator for you or your staff, as far as electric infrastructure and transportation, whether it be air or ground, what are you hopeful about and what can Vermont potentially expect?
Well, of course, we have to look at the fact sometimes we have long distances to drive, but this is not those of us who talked about electric cars and buses a few years ago, we were like, what is this, some kind of crunchy granola? Now, when you see major car manufacturers say they'll make only electric cars or electric vehicles in the next decade to decade and a half, they wake up. I look at a charging station by the Red Hen in Middlesex, where I go for soup and sandwich often when I'm home. And there's always somebody plugged in there. But I think it's not a chicken egg thing. I mean, you've got to be doing this all together. I think that the pressure is going to be there with the manufacturers, Ford and others, some of the Japanese manufacturers, in going electric. The pressure is going to be there. We are going to be hurt badly as a state if we don't have fast and easy charging everywhere, on our interstate, on the outside, by our businesses, residential areas. And there is going to be money that can be used by the states that they want to. I don't know what each step is going to be. I think it's going to be an evolution, but I think it's going to be a much, much faster evolution than anybody thought of just a few years ago. I don't know whether Chris or Jeff, if you want to add anything to that.
I would say that I think we've been working closely with the state, and there's probably a time in the future where every new bus the state buys has the potential to be an electric bus, and we're not quite at that point, but the senator's been making sure the resources are there through a program called the Low or No Emission Program at USDOT to fund those buses. And we have some, as was noted by Claudia, in Burlington and other places. So we're getting there. And then to Kyle's question about electric aviation, I think that's been a piece that's been missing. The administration, I think, is still working to understand what electric aviation is all about, and how to fit it into their proposals. And I think, Senator, when you were talking with Transportation Secretary Buttigieg, you mentioned Beta the other day. So I would hand it back to you, because you're the one that's having those conversations.
I talked about what they're doing in Burlington and with the electric helicopters, and how they're signing a UPS contract. And I wish I could say more of it. Than that, I can't, because I've made a plan to go there, if not this week, I mean this coming week, but the next time I'm home, to get a full briefing on it. But I'd also point out that they are hiring, Charles, I think they're hiring about as much percentage just about any company around for people in building that. And what I'm finding more and more, people just say, no, not electric. They'll say, oh, tell us more. How do we do it? And that's a good sign.
It's definitely exciting, and Beta's certainly a really forward-thinking company that we're happy to have here in Vermont. Going to jump around yet again. Beth Kennett from Liberty Hill Farm asks, is there any upcoming support for agricultural infrastructure in Vermont, either in this infrastructure plan or in other bills that are in the works?
And I saw one of the comments come through as we were talking about how in cold weather, batteries can lose so much of their power. And that's obviously one of the things that we have to face, because we Vermonters know we do have cold weather. Now on this, in your question on agriculture, what was that again?
So Beth Kennett from Liberty Hill Farm, Senator, asks if we can expect any upcoming supports for agricultural infrastructure, either in the infrastructure bill or other moving pieces in the Congress.
Well, I think it's pretty clear we're not going to leave out agriculture, and we also know that agriculture is evolving in the way we do it, in updating and hold on just a second. Yep. And I'll tell them this will take me a couple of minutes, but I'll be there. Thank you. The floor is calling me back, but yes, we're going to have to. It's not farming as I saw when I was a kid, walking around farms in Montpelier or over in South Reigate with grandparents or anywhere else. It's much different. But again, I say this is, if we're at all wise, if we use this money wise, not just like here's a check, but actually target it, we can so dramatically improve for the next generation, just about any kind of business we have, or how we do our lodgings, our tourist industry, every single aspect of that. I can stay for one more, and then I am going to have to leave, and I apologize.
Well, I'll give you another infrastructure related, I guess more focused on higher ed. Robin Gillian of Vermont Technical College asks how higher education will be supported post-pandemic. And I'm assuming he's referring to, from a congressional standpoint, what you see impacting higher education, especially in rural areas like Vermont, where we kind of have unique challenges. with higher ed?
Well, I think that's a two-way street. I mean, we get the money, but higher ed is going to respond to it. I mean, we've had, I'll give you one example. I helped Norwich University get money a few years ago for their cyber center, and they were aiming for that. Now, the only problem they have is that people are trying to hire the kids even before they graduate because of what they're learning. You're going to have to find those things that reflect the needs of today. Champlain College did the same with theirs. We're fortunate to have the University of Vermont is, I think, superb. We have to give them the money. They're going through some evolutions, and I think the new president of UVM has had to face more challenges in 2 years' time than most would have in a 20-year period there. And so we'll do it. But I don't pretend to be an expert, but I've talked to enough of them to know it's not going to be education as it's always been. There are going to be changes in their direction and the nature of what they do. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And we have to understand that. If we're not going to be doing education to allow people who graduate to be effectively in the workforce and then to have the jobs there so they can, it does not work. But I am more optimistic than pessimistic.
That's definitely nice to hear, and completely agree. It's an evolving landscape, higher education. Senator, if you need to get to the floor, we won't keep you any longer. We certainly appreciate your time, and if you can hang out, that's great. But I know that you indicated you only had time for one left, so.
I am going to have to go, but I'm glad you're doing this. And Chris and Jeff, thank you for your work on it. We're trying to get a whole lot of things done at once in the Senate. I juggle 3 different major committees in trying to do that. But fortunately, some good people working with me. So thank you all very much. And I may see some of you in Vermont next week, I hope.
I hope to see you, Senator. Thank you so much.
Take care.
And Charles, if I may, to add on to what the senator said about with a little more specifics, is that the higher education investments are expected to be included within the American Family Plan, which would be released. As I said, is supposedly is going to be released this week, so we'll know more in the coming days.
Great. Well, that's exciting stuff. Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. And Chris, this might be a question for you. I know we discussed immigration as it relates to workforce and childcare as it relates to workforce, but generally speaking, we've had a lot of folks that have left the workforce, and a lot of folks are still out of the workforce right now as a result of the pandemic, which is extremely challenging for our small businesses, but it also presents an opportunity in some instances for those workers to be reskilled to re-enter the workforce in other ways, maybe in a career change or something of that nature. What sort of programs can Vermont expect to be able to access coming down from the federal level to kind of augment our workforce and improve our workforce, be it reskilling or otherwise?
A great question, Charles, and a key point of kind of the workforce issues that I think the senator is thinking about. There's a subset of USDOL, the Employment and Training Administration, that's a good partner for Vermont DOL, and they have programs and resources that speak to exactly that topic. And I think we're expecting to see both through their normal course of work as well as some of what the administration is going to propose, investments in ETA that would fund initiatives in Vermont. You know, a recent one that did come to the state, the Supporting Working Families program that offered Vermonters supports for folks that are currently in the workforce but looking to enter the manufacturing field, offered them support for their tuition, as well as wraparound services for finding childcare for their kids, and some transportation costs. I think we expect to see innovative programs like that coming from the administration. I think we were looking for programs that come from the health side of things, looking that would help those with substance abuse disorder find pathways from those afflictions, and finding ways to re-enter the workforce. So I think we expect a number of different initiatives, and then certainly the immigration piece. The senator is looking for a change. You know, we have many different types of immigration to the state through various visa programs. The one that's gotten the most attention recently is the asylum program, and I think we expect that the administration will keep its commitments to bringing folks in through the asylum program, and Vermont's programs really depend on those levels being where they have been historically. So if 300 folks are going to come into the Chittenden County region through the refugee resettlement program, we need the historic levels, historic, not exceeding, but kind of where they were prior to the previous administration, for the supports to be there for our Vermont programs to welcome those new Americans. So I think we see multiple avenues to that question.
It's definitely something we hear constantly at the chamber. I'd say outside of COVID-19, this is workforce, generally speaking, and workforce shortages. It's kind of Vermont's economic crisis, you know, if we weren't in a pandemic, and I'd expect it to continue to be coming out of the pandemic. So we appreciate all the work on that and look forward to working with you on it. I guess this is more of a general question, and maybe one that's good to close with. In your opinion, Janet Lumbra from Mobile Medical International Corporation asks this: what do you feel is a realistic timeline for Vermont's economic recovery, considering the after effects of the pandemic? When, I know this is one of those reading the tea leaf questions, and given how crazy the last year has been, it's a difficult one to answer, but when do you see economic normalcy occurring, or kind of what indicators are you looking for to know that that's occurred?
Well, that's a big question, right? Because everybody's answer to that is different. And I think the senator alluded to that in some of his remarks, of noting that we have different groups of Vermonters that have impacted this pandemic, been impacted by the pandemic differently. And so what might be true for somebody who's just looking to go back to the office and be able to go out to dinner and do the things of their normal life and be supporting their local economy in that way, may be very different from the Vermonter that has been forced to leave the workforce, and you know, their child program, even with the state aid or other resources, wasn't able to stay open, and so they are now having to find, as you noted, a new job or be trained for a new vocation. So I think we feel like there's differing avenues for different people, and it could be a while. You know, I think we share the optimism of the governor and those that have been participating in the Vermont Forward program and seeing the reopen of the economy and welcoming tourists back to the state. But that is probably a longer path for Vermonters that have had a deeper impact, and you know, whether they've become homeless or whatever that has challenged them during the pandemic. For those Vermonters, it's probably going to be a longer road. So,
well, I think that was a great answer, and we definitely agree. It varies wildly depending on what industry or what walk of life you're from, certainly. But I think you framed that well.
Could I follow the senator's lead and just notice there have been a couple of good questions in the chat about broadband that, while I think we had hoped the senator was going to touch on more, he kind of glossed over. Michael's and others have raised the question of how is money going to be distributed. And I think, you know, this is the challenge of offering a briefing for you all at a time when there isn't really a legislative text to accompany the proposal. There's kind of big dollar figures, and I think this goes across all the topics we've discussed today, whether they be electrification of transportation or childcare or housing and higher ed, is that, you know, the details really aren't there for us to tell you this is how it's going to happen. But one of the proposals that's been out there that I think the senator has some concerns about is the proposal from Mr. Clyburn in the House, which is kind of been the general bill that most House members, if they're interested in broadband, have added their name to. And it would give a small amount of the money to each state and then distribute the rest of it through a reverse auction where ISPs would say, here is the subsidy we'd be willing to accept to provide service in this area. And the math gets much easier in that dynamic if you perhaps provide internet via satellite, or if you are able to cover a large geographic area with a wireless signal, than if you're laying fiber. And I think the senator sees that there are room for multiple solutions to delivering high-speed broadband to folks in Vermont, but we've tried wireless internet and it hasn't been a resounding success for our state. And so I think he's particularly interested in making sure the playing field is open for the communications union districts to get resources. I think there's a lot of resources that are going to be available through the money that's already come to the state, but in terms of this next plan, making a bit of a more level playing field is something that he's certainly focused on to ensure the CUDs can compete with the Starlinks and the others of the world that are in the space.
Yeah, thank you for touching on that. I know that folks always want to hear about broadband, and at the chamber, we certainly support whatever gets Vermonters properly connected and connected quickly. So that's kind of been our stance. Chris and Jeff, do you have anything to add or to close with?
I guess the last piece that we would touch on is kind of the topic du jour. And I don't know if the senator made the announcement already today, Jeff, or not, but with his ascendancy to the chairman of appropriations, the senator has made a decision to bring earmarks back to Vermont, or well, to the country and therefore Vermont. And so in the coming weeks, we're going to be working with organizations around the state. We have no shortage of ideas that we've already received, but he's going to be looking for ways to invest public dollars wisely in the state, so that we can, you know, as he said, build back stronger and really advance the economy of the state. And so we're looking for good community projects, infrastructure projects, all sorts of things. So likely in the coming days, we'll have a form on our website, or Jeff and I put our contact information in the chat. If anybody's got a project that they are working on that they want to make sure is on the senator's radar, we would love to hear about it and see if there's a way to single out funding for that initiative.
Something tells me you're not going to have a shortage of people who take you up on providing ideas.
Yeah.
That's really tremendously exciting, and we certainly look forward to hearing more about that. So that concludes today's event. I want to reiterate how thankful we are for the senator taking some time out of working on the floor to chat with us all. And Jeff and Chris, we so appreciate you joining us as well.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you to the chamber for hosting this great event.
And thank you to all the attendees who are asking great questions today. Thanks, guys.